The session that I'm going to do really is all about doing network assessments before you deliver a solution like that to your customers. And I was going to try and be as funny as Doug, but obviously I can't do hair jokes, right? But I can play country music.
That'll start every time you get boring.
Okay. So,
You'll pay for that.
you know, but the 2 years of hair damage thing, I mean, I washed my hair several times today because I think I could really use that, and I need your opinion. Is it working? Bear with me. Okay. Yeah. So, you know, I'm not funny the way I talk, but I am funny the way I look. So that's what I went with. Although, have you ever noticed how on the shampoo bottles it says lather, rinse, repeat? To a programmer, that drives us crazy. Lather, rinse, repeat. Lather, rinse, repeat.
4 times a day.
Yes. All right, so we're going to talk about VXPulse and VXTracker. Using those two tools to go and test a customer's environment, gather information about a customer's environment before you're on the hook for delivering quality voice services to them. We'll talk a little bit about the data collection, some different mechanisms for that. We'll also talk some about the data analysis. And then I'm going to show you some of the reporting. So it's great to be able to collect all the data, but you also need to be able to deliver a report to that end user. So we're going to go through that. And I'm going to tag team this with Dan Bravo. Dan's going to talk on the VXTracker side. Dan's been with VXTracker, I don't know, 10 years?
Yeah, just about.
Almost 10 years. So he's someone that knows that product better than anyone. I am completely and totally dependent on him when I get in over my head on the VXTracker side, so I thought it made sense for us to have him present that part of the call, and I don't have the magic clicker. Okay. So just to talk about the scenario I want to walk through, and I picked a fairly easy one. Basically, we have a customer that has a headquarters location, and then they also have a branch location. There's some type of connectivity between those two locations where we're going to put voice over IP. So in most cases, although not always, if I'm just doing voice over IP within one location, the network, I'm hoping, is going to be okay. Where I'm bound to run into problems is anytime that I've got some unknown connection out here, whatever that is, that's going to be the most likely place where I'm going to run into problems. Okay? Within the solution, you see we've got the PBX on the headquarters side. We're going to put a VXPulse agent in the headquarters location and a VXPulse agent on the branch location. That's going to be critical for some of the testing that we're going to do. In addition to just collecting information about how the network is performing, we're actually going to do something to exercise it. Okay? So just because I can do a ping from one to the other with really low latency doesn't mean that when I put voice on it and I start stressing that I'm going to have that same performance. And that's why we're going to put an agent on either side of that connection. So VXTracker, I'm going to hand this over to Dan now, and he will be your lovely tour guide for a few minutes.
Hi guys, can you hear me? Yeah. Cool. So the first step in doing this type of assessment is to get a good idea of the type of call volume that you have first. So before you start slinging calls between one agent and another to see if the network can handle it, the first step is to use VXTracker to get an idea of the call volume and the trunk capacity that the customer is handling right now. How do I click through this? Right here. All right. So the first thing I'll talk about is how VXTracker is deployed. There are 3 options in deploying VXTracker. The first one is virtualized on-premise. So that would be on the customer site. The second one, The second one is a data buffer deployed to the customer. So here in this scenario, you'll have VXTracker sitting on your system, hosted locally on your side, and then you would deploy a data buffer on the customer's side, which will put the data over the internet to the VXTracker system, and there you would analyze the call volumes. And the final is in instances like Cisco and ShoreTel, where you can set those up to send the log files directly to VXTracker. You can just sling those over via FTP and have VXTracker analyze the data that way. So here's a typical trunk capacity report in VXTracker. In this report, VXTracker is basically taking your standard PRIs, which are normally your various trunk groups and the trunk members within those groups, and taking a look at the call volume and letting you know about the trunk capacity, what it's handling throughout the day. So as you look at the trunk capacity over there, you'll see that it's from 7 to, so that bottom 7, 8, 9 on the bottom is the time, and the top is the percentage. So throughout the course of the day, you see what kind of capacity your trunk group is handling. And at the bottom graph, you'll see the call volume. So how the call volume has peaked and how the trunk capacity or the trunks handled the capacity of the call volume throughout the course of the day. And this gives you a good idea of the call volume that the customer is handling, which allows us to, and this is another report, a trunk utilization report based on call type. So here you have inbound toll, interstate, international interstate. So once again, it gives you a good idea of the type of call volume the customer is handling, which allows us to set up VXPulse to properly test how that customer would be able to handle VoIP calls over the network. And here are some VoIP bandwidth estimates. This is our analytics report. It's one of many reports that VXTracker has. In this case, we are monitoring 3 different carriers and their average capacities. And this particular report gives you a good snapshot of what kind of call volume the customer is getting over the course of the day. We also have reports that will show you what kind of call volume the customer is handling over the course of a week, a month, a year. And it gives you a good base for when you set up VXPulse to do your VoIP testing and get that assessment down. And that's it. Once you have all of that data collected and you know what kind of call volume is going on the customer system, the next step would be to bring in VXPulse, hang a couple of agents on different network segments, and start your testing there. And I'll hand it back over to Michael.
All right, so the main point with VXTracker, you guys probably run into this all the time when you're going into a customer to replace an older system with a newer system. One of the very first things that you want to understand is how many calls are they currently making, right? If you're going to size, if you're going to architect a solution, you have to know that. Byron and I were just talking about this over lunch. He's in an instance right now, he's working on a project where they're looking at changing the circuits. They're looking at moving over to SIP trunks from their existing PRIs. And when he asked them the question, okay, so you've got 92 channels right now. How many of those are you actually using? And they don't know. So without having information, we're all going to kind of over-engineer that, right? Because we know if I don't put enough bandwidth in there to handle their voice over IP quantity, the quality will suffer. I know that my help desk is going to get overwhelmed by that customer complaining about the problems with voice. And what VXTracker allows you to do is go into the existing environment, pull out the call detail records from whatever that PBX system is, bring them into that system, and get some actual data, okay? VXTracker has been around as a product for a very long time. We've worked with pretty much any PBX that you can name. So you don't need to be worried about, can it work with Cisco, can it work with Avaya, ShoreTel, Nortel, Mitel, Asterisk, 3Com, I mean, you name it, we've worked with it. The other thing to keep in mind is that you may go into environments where they already have call accounting. And oftentimes, if a company has call accounting, it's really hard to displace that because it's probably part of business processes. The way VXTracker is architected is that there's a small piece of JavaScript that sits between the raw data and the database that we call a parser. If they are already collecting the data, all we have to do is be able to get out some very basic information from the existing call accounting system. We can throw it into VXTracker and run these reports for you if their existing solution can't provide that data for you.
Doesn't that assume they're saving the raw call records on this?
Not necessarily. I mean, if the existing call accounting software is database based, we should just be able to query and pull out that information. What you're really wanting is the volume of activity, and you also really are looking at that trunk utilization because that's going to give you simultaneous usage, right? That's the key there.
I might need an extra trade ticket for that. Good question.
Oh, he does? Are we giving out tickets?
Well, I thought you might spice things up.
I also need to do like a reference, right? So, that's like totally your opinion, man. Pretty good. Okay, so VXPulse, we're going to go through active QoE, bandwidth, ping, traceroute, passive QoE, and other SNMP metrics that you might want to take a look at. So now we understand the number of calls that we need to architect to. So active QoE, I think about this as the highest level testing. What we're going to do with active QoE testing is take those two agents and have them make voice over IP and or video calls to another agent that we have in the environment. And we're pumping that same traffic on there that a call would make or a video would make. So we have to also be careful that we're not going in and saying, hey, well, let's see if this thing can support 50 simultaneous video conferences during business hours. Not a good idea. When we first got that capability and I was playing around with it, it wasn't very long before our internal network guy called me up and said, what are you doing? Because I'm consuming all of the available bandwidth doing those video call tests. It's also, to me, it's the best place to start with a network assessment. Honestly, if you put the agents in place, you run a whole bunch of test calls back and forth, you really stress that connectivity to the point where the production system will be, and you have zero issues, you can probably stop there. You probably don't need to do anything else other than just collect this information. Very good reporting about it that I'll show you, and you'll be able to, with confidence, say, we've tested this with 20 simultaneous calls. There's no issues. The MOS score is at 4.3, 4.4, as good as you can expect, and we're good to go. I want to just show you the configuration. What do I have available for configuration here? There we go. So what you're seeing here, this is one tab in a monitoring template within the VXPulse product. Each one of those tabs represents something that we can do. We're going to be focused here on the QoE tab to set up this agent-to-agent calling. So the codec you can choose. I also just did a quick screenshot so you can see the codecs that we currently support. So you'll see we've got those audio ones in there. You'll see that we have the video ones in as well. Obviously, if you're going to be deploying a solution that uses a particular codec, you want to use the same one when you're doing the testing. You really want an apples-to-apples test happening here. Other things that you can do, so the call duration. So how long do I want each of those test calls to last? The number of calls is the number of simultaneous calls. So again, if a customer says, or if you use VXTracker and you know that their max capacity has been 10 simultaneous calls, let's do 10 simultaneous test transactions. Okay, we want that same level. The TOS setting, so that's all about quality of service. When we're doing the test calls, we want those to be able to use whatever's configured on the network for quality of service. It's one of the reasons that when you're doing this, you have to use our hardware agent solution to do it. It's Linux-based, so we can do that QoS tagging. If you install the VXPulse agent on a Windows server, it all works, but we can't tag those packets. Okay, so for active QoE, you need that hardware-software combination. In this particular one, the 184 translates basically to expedited forwarding. And if you need some help translating between some other QoS type, we can assist you with that. It's not. Yeah, I would have to ask Kevin why we end up with 184. But typically, if you can find one of those sites that'll translate for you and you get to the hex, you also see that this is the TOS setting for it is the 184. And then how often do I want those to run? In this case, every 15 seconds. And then the schedule. So this can also be important, especially if you're going into a network or a customer's environment where you're terrified of what that connectivity is going to be able to handle. Let's not do the stress testing initially during business hours. So let's set it up, let's schedule it so we run it over the weekends first. So we're going to have the least possibility of disrupting their business if we do the testing when most people aren't there at work. And you can also schedule it for particular hours. So if you wanted to change that so that it only runs after business hours, you can do that as well. Within VXPulse, each one of these tabs has a section here where it's basically what am I going to collect and when am I going to collect it. And then there's also a rules section to each tab. And the rules is all about alarming. So in VXPulse, you can just set it up to just go and collect data and never generate an alarm, or you can control when it does send an alarm. So if we're talking about active QoE, the types of things that are applicable are packet loss, delay, jitter, and MOS. So you could alarm on any of those variables, and you can set the threshold for any of those to whatever you want them to be. So if your best practices, we never want to put voice over IP in if we can't guarantee a MOS of 3.5 or higher, then you could set up some alarming for that. Excuse me. The alarming is more applicable when you're doing ongoing monitoring. And we're talking about this as pre-deployment network assessment. But in my opinion, leaving those probes in place to do these active QoE tests periodically is going to make it easier to sleep at night when you're thinking about that customer's environment. So maybe we're only doing one test call once every 10 minutes, but I have my alarm levels set up. So I know if those test calls, if the MOS on those is dropping, I can receive an alert to my help desk before I'm receiving calls from the end customer that they've got quality problems happening. So typically, pre-deployment, I wouldn't use the rules, but the ongoing monitoring, I definitely would. One thing that's missing in this configuration is you're not telling that agent what other agent to contact, right? This is just, okay, Mr. Agent, this is what I want you to do, but I haven't told you to whom you need to speak. We do that through active QoE routes. So if what you'll do is go into the detail page for that particular agent, and you'll tell it what other agents to talk to. It may just be one other, but with the routing, you're able to basically duplicate whatever the topology will be. You know, how can calls potentially flow in this customer's environment? Let's make sure that we test all of those links, all of those pathways. My best practice when I'm setting them up is always to name those routes. Oops, wrong button. I always want to name the routes from the agent to the other agent. So here I've got an example, agent A to agent B. The reason I'm doing that is when I'm looking at a report, I want to understand what two agents were involved in those test calls, and I also want to understand the direction. So we would also always tell you that you need to start those calls from both sides, right? Have A call B and have B call A. Just in case within that network configuration there's anything that's different depending on which direction you're going. And I'm not a voice over IP deployer. I've never deployed a phone system. I actually didn't know anything about phone systems until I came to work here. But I understand that if you can have your quality of service set up incorrectly so that you've got great quality one way and horrible the other, this will tell you that. So the reporting. It's going to give you some really baseline high-level information about all those test calls. So within here, you can see the route name. So if I have multiple routes, it will display those for me. We're going to give you the average MOS for that, the average delay, jitter, packet loss, and the total number of test calls that were made for whatever the reporting period is. In addition to that, we're going to take that MOS and we're going to translate that into a quantitative value for you. Was it a great call? Was it good? Was it okay? Was it poor? Was it terrible? So those are the 5 buckets you're going to see. And in this particular case, we can see that we had some good, we had 1 great, and we had the bulk of these were just okay. That may not be something that you're comfortable deploying on top of if most of the users are going to have an okay user experience. You'll notice the hyperlink here. So if I click on the hyperlink, what I'm going to get is the detail for what happened on every one of those calls. So again, same data, user experience, MOS, delay, jitter, packet loss. And this was my great one. Here are my good ones. And then I started really not having some happy campers. So here we had a terrible call. And just by quickly looking at it, you can see that that was driven by the packet loss. 6.3% packet loss in that particular one. That's going to be a problem for you when you're deploying a voice over IP solution. The other thing that we can do, although it's not built into the GUI yet, I imagine that we will at some point, is I can also verify that my QoS tags are making it from point A to point B. And I do that by basically logging into that agent using TCP Dump to capture those packets. And then what I'm looking for is that toss value. So now here you can see we're hex.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Not being a coder or anything like that, is that a phone call? TCD pump?
It is. Oops, sorry. That should be TCP Dump. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't that far in.
Gail's going to take me out behind the woodshed after this presentation now, right?
I'm sitting here running through my head trying to figure out what TCD is.
Sometimes when you open the dump, it
So it's
doesn't
right
cut,
in
you
the
have to
second
pump it out.
list of devices.
So if the records are stuck, you have to pump it instead of just dumping it.
Dang.
I've got a little something on that from the San Diego Zoo. I'll talk about it a little later.
So since this is a very technical session, here's a very technical question that somebody should earn a card for. So if I were to try and edit that string in VI, I could switch those characters with typing 2 letters. Anybody know what they are? I'm going to win the card. But there's VI that will do it. Nobody? Nobody? I'm the oldest geek in the room, apparently. So if I put my cursor right there, I can type X. It's going to remove the D. And then I can type P to paste it, and it'll end up over there. That was pointless, wasn't it?
Here's your drink. Hey, nobody else even noticed. Why is the drink ticket for no?
Oh, totally. She totally does. Yeah. Okay. So another good way when you're in a customer's environment that you don't own yet, to just verify that their QoS is working the way that they tell you to. So we put these agents in place. I SSH into that agent. I run that fancy little command down there. And I can just look at the data to make sure that the QoS tagging is making it all the way. Bandwidth. So obviously, voice over IP solutions require bandwidth. VXPulse is also capable of collecting all that information. So what you're going to want to do is collect the bandwidth information for any border device that sits on a connection that voice over IP is going to go over. And we do that via SNMP. Typically, what we have found in our experience is your customers, even with their own equipment, are okay giving you read permissions to pull SNMP data. And from that, what we're going to do is collect the in and out octets. That's going to give us that bandwidth information. The other thing I would also do is a lot more of that interface level data if you can. Let's go ahead and pull in interface errors, interface discards, because that's also going to point to potential network problems that you're going to face once you put your voice over IP solution on that customer's network. So we have a couple of different ways to look at bandwidth. We've got the one that the sales guys want me to show in demos, if this will go forward. Just kidding. No, actually, we're really lucky. I really enjoy working with the folks that we have in sales here. I have been in other companies where that was not true. So this is old behavior that's exhibiting here. So this is a nice fancy view. Basically, you can bring this up. It's going to display that in and out bandwidth. What's happening down below here is I can basically take my mouse and select a small time slice, and it'll zoom in down here for me to see that information. Okay. So it's really pretty, and it demos very nicely in the system when we're bringing it up and say, ooh, look how fancy. But we also will give you something that you're more used to seeing. That means a little bit more to me and gives me some more granularity. So the reason that this thing means more to me is you can kind of see that we kind of have these plateaus, right? We're spiking up and kind of leveling off, and nothing really is going above that. What that tells me is that regardless of what bandwidth they think they have, that's probably the max amount that they can push through there, because you're not seeing anything spike over, and those are pretty flat on the top.
Does that equate to 4 QoS when they flatten out?
It depends. How's that? Huh? I can be using all my bandwidth, but if I have QoS set right and I'm lucky, call quality will still be fine.
What's the interval for grabbing that data and summarize points in the graph?
So you can control that. Just like we controlled all those settings in the QoE template, when you're pulling SNMP, you can tell it how often to go and get it. And a very good point. If I'm only going out and getting in and out octets once an hour, what you're getting is the average bandwidth utilization over that hour-long period. Because I have 2 data points, I add them together, divide them by 2, and away you go. So if bandwidth is really a huge concern, you want to be pulling that information more frequently. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions? Matt?
Going back to your TCP dump, does that actually just give you data on what was just sent through the last few packets, or does it actually turn on tracing from UDP?
It's kind of the streaming. So once I type that command, it's going to show me all the packets that match the filter criteria.
How do you turn it off?
Just like Control-C to stop the TCP dump. Yes, and that's something that you're going to do manually. I think long-term we'll end up bringing in that indicator into the GUI and make it part of the reporting so that I can understand that the tagging made it all the way, because that is kind of a pain in the butt, honestly. But it's important data. So.
Just out of curiosity, I'm really familiar with WireStar. How large are the files when you start running like this?
So you're actually not creating a file, it's just showing it to you. Yeah, it's just displaying it on the screen where you've SSH'd in there.
Okay, so you're not actually...
Not in that particular case. We're going to talk about passive QoE here in a minute, and that does have some data collection components to it, but I'll explain why it's not a huge concern still. NetFlow, anybody know what NetFlow is? How many of these can I give away? All right. Who's my friend? Anyone know what NetFlow is? Michael?
Well, it just shows the application traffic, and depending on how it's set up, you can get samples of it from a certain time. It's a nice application layer view of your network.
Yeah.
But it is, a lot of times it's samples, so it's not 100% accurate.
Yeah. So it's bandwidth monitoring 2.0 is the way I like to think about it. Knowing that I've got X amount coming in and X amount going out is one thing. But let's say that you're at a customer's environment, you know that you need to deploy voice over IP, they're not willing to do any investment or additional investment in, maybe increasing bandwidth between locations, and you know you've got a choke point. The next question from the customer should be, what's taking all that bandwidth? And NetFlow will tell you that. Okay, it's basically going to tell you with any TCP connection, there are 2 computers involved, right? It's going to tell you what those 2 computers were by IP address. And it's also going to try and tell you what application it is. And it just does that by looking at what TCP or UDP port that traffic is on. So if you're familiar with the concept of a well-known port, typically when I connect to a web server, that's going to be TCP port 80, right? That's what NetFlow data will show you. We get asked for SFlow quite often, and it is on our feature request list. It just seems to always fall down in the priorities. SFlow. So again, I have a very nice demo view of NetFlow information. The fancy pants view. So from this, again, what I'm looking at, the top is still bandwidth, in and out. And now if I drag that little time slice, what it's doing is it's showing me all of the flow data, all of the network connections that were active during that time period. This is showing me them by IP address. And then if I click on that IP address, I didn't do a screenshot of this, it will show me all of the ports that are relevant to that particular flow. So I know, in addition to the IP address, what it was that's using it. We also have more traditional views of the NetFlow information. So here what you're seeing, again, is here's the source host name, and those are just IP addresses. And it's showing you the kilobit utilization. If I click on one of those, then what it's going to do is allow me to see the other side of it, and then in addition, let me see all of the different ports that were being used. And then it'll graph that for you. So you can see clearly whatever this blue one is, TCP totally blurry port, is what was using all the bandwidth at that point.
What if we need internal DNS for our DNS servers? Will it resolve the IP for us?
I don't know.
Make sure you repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. So if we can resolve internally, reverse DNS, look up the TCP or the IP addresses, will we get host names? The Shee brothers.
Yeah, the answer is yes. So all of the flows that come in are put into a background queue for resolution. So it immediately sends out the records to Abbott, and then within 30 seconds, because resolution takes a while, it goes up and enriches those records where appropriate. It also has both local cache and server cache, and there's configurations for how aggressive you want to do that. So you can have it be the first go, you're going to get quite a lot of queries, and then on it after 24 hours, and you can configure all that.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'll add
Nice.
the other thing is that it's nice from a deployment perspective. Everything Michael's talking to you about is powered by one agent. So whether you're synthetically generating or grabbing data from SNMP and routers and bandwidth, or having it listen from NetFlow, whether you're having one agent do that for 10 different routers, it's just nice. You get that one box or the one software agent in the customer footprint, and then you can enable these as layers. Some assessments would do all the things Michael's talking about. Some will only do one or two. It's up to you. It's really up to the customer. But demonstrating that the assessment can start with Tracker and all the way through it is like a great way to start.
Thank you.
So what is doing the DNS resolution? Is it the device on site, or is it being done trying to do it in the cloud?
Because it's queued, it's being done up in the cloud
No.
on the agent.
Yeah, it has to resolve
Okay.
it. So the agent is behind their firewall in this
Yep.
example. And so
Yep.
collecting NetFlow from a router that's spitting that behind the firewall, so the resolution happens firewall. With the background queue, what I was saying is that so it doesn't have to issue the same request over and over when it knows what the device is. It has an expiration there. And on the server
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, we're going to move now to ping. So ping may seem like kind of a silly thing to do as part of a network assessment. You can't test QoS with it, right? Because that's not how you're doing your traffic prioritization. It does, however, provide you another data set to cross-reference. If you just type a ping command, you're going to get information about packet loss and delay, right? That's just what you get out of a ping. The other time that this is really important, and I'm not going to talk too much to this, but where network assessments get really hard is when you're talking about doing hosted voice. So they're going to use their internet connectivity for all the voice traffic, right? That's really difficult to test unless we have a really good relationship with whatever that hosted voice over IP provider is, because I can't get an agent there, right? In those cases, pinging to the border of that hosted provider is going to give you some data at least. And the benefit to doing it inside of VXPulse is I'm scheduling it, and I can do it for a really long period of time to do that data collection, and then do some aggregated reporting on that data. This is a ping report, really fancy. What am I doing and what's happening? You'll see the average response time, the number of packets sent, and the number of packets received. So here's where you're going to be able to detect if you've got things that are dropping. Just like with active QoE, with ping, you can set alarm levels if you wanted to, and that can be on the delay, the packet loss, or complete failure. Traceroute is very similar, right? Traceroute is like a ping, but I'm going to interrogate every hop in that route for the same type of information. Again, a hosted provider solution, a hosted voice over IP provider solution, I want to do trace routes to them because I'm totally dependent on that customer's internet connectivity, and more specifically, that customer's route across the internet from their internet carrier to the hosted provider. Again, no QoS, obviously. So I set up that trace route. What it's going to do is give me that average delay over time, so I can see if maybe there are spikes at particular points of time during every day. So, at noon when everybody gets free reign for internet connectivity, does my delay really go through the roof when I'm trying to talk to that hosted provider? It's going to point out those type of problems. And then for any one of these, on the other hand, here, I can click into that hyperlink and I'll get that hop-by-hop look. So maybe as I'm spiking up, I would be able to pinpoint where in that route all that delay is being added. And maybe it's not because I'm using too much internet connectivity. Maybe it's because it's Comcast, it's 3 o'clock, the kids get home, and they're going Xbox Live, right? And you're basically in the shared bandwidth environment at that point. You're also going to get hop counts, so something else to kind of look at when you're looking at this. If the hop counts are constantly changing, that can be a really bad thing for that voice over IP quality.
Is there a recommended amount of hops that you think is acceptable?
Smarter people than me are probably going to have to jump in and help me here. I don't know that it's so much the number of hops as it is just the aggregate delay and packet loss. Yeah. Anything else to add, Carrie? Byron?
I wouldn't say the number of hops, but for every hop, I think mentally for every hop, you're more likely introducing an opportunity for jitter or distribution of packets problem. Most of the problem with quality is not a straight up and down delay issue. It's like a router, the packet being stuck in some queue at some router because it didn't recognize a setting, or there's contention, or that interface has a problem, and some such thing. So traceroute is nice to give you that symptomatic, like, why is it a problem at that one pocket? But really, the synthetic generation, I'm sure, as Michael talked about, passively watching all the calls to really see what that metric is. Unfortunately, troubleshooting quality, you need a little bit of all this data. It's nice that it's all automated, scheduled, put into one backend system. That's really
So passive QoE. So active QoE, again, is an agent making a test call to another agent. Passive QoE is basically doing packet captures on the customer's network segment for that voice over IP data, and then being able to do some reporting against that. When you should use it, So, you know, if the customer's already using a hosted voice over IP provider and they brought you in to solve the problems with it, if you put passive QoE in, you're going to start getting information about the actual phone calls that are taking place. And you'll be able to figure out what is causing it. Is it the packet loss, delay, or jitter? It's a pain in the butt to set up because you have to have A, customers that have switches that are capable of doing port mirroring, and B, you have to convince them that it's a good idea for them to go to that effort. So wherever possible, active QoE is the way to go. Passive QoE, though, just provides us with kind of another mechanism we can use to do these assessments. Passive QoE reports. So we have a couple of them. One that just is going to show you that information aggregate. Another one that's just going to show you the ones that have poor call quality. So you can kind of zoom in on those to see what's happening. And then this MOS by endpoint, there's so many of these are really skinny, but you can kind of pick out the ones that may be problematic. You get that data in a grid view down here so you can see it. So you may find out that it's only one computer or one IP endpoint that's having issues with that hosted provider. This would let you figure out that it's only to that one IP address. Now I can start looking at things like, I mean, it could be, if they're using a soft client, it could be antivirus, right? Antivirus is getting in the way when I'm trying to do this somehow. Or I need to update drivers, USB drivers for my USB headset. I mean, so many different things at that point can cause that call quality. But this would allow you to see if there's a relationship between particular IP endpoints and quality problems. So other SNMP data that we would typically go at, this is really going to be a depends one. I'm not sure I'm comfortable saying that way. But if you're having problems with data going through one particular network device, you might want to pull some other information from that. If it's not bandwidth, you know you have plenty of bandwidth, but yet there's still this particular endpoint is introducing some delay that is causing me problems. Let's look at the CPU, the memory, interface errors, that other information that we collect. This is not typically something that I do out of the gate in a network assessment, but if I've done all of the other stuff and I've gotten to the point where I know I need to drill in further, let's go and get some more data and see if we can be a little more definitive in identifying what's causing that issue.
So when you're querying SNMP, then you don't have a default set of MIBs or OIDs that you're doing. You have to add them all manually one by one.
So VXPulse is nice in that we have the concept of a configuration template. And in that configuration template is where you have to do all that once. And then as I'm going to pull that information from a router, I basically just associate that configuration template with the device I want to monitor. And so you've just done the definition a single time. And obviously you can have lots of different templates. So depending on what you want to do, you can put the correct one in place.
And we ship
Yeah.
100 different templates that are sensible by model, and our discovery hooks into that. So if you fire network discovery and you're lucky enough to get the SNMP, like sys description stuff back, there's some fuzzy logic that says, okay, we're pretty sure this is an HP and an AirPod.
So putting it all together, I've gone out and I've collected all that information. I'll tell you right now, currently there's no single report. And I'll tell you why there's no single report. We were caught off guard by the interest in using VXPulse as a network assessment tool. And it was not built for that, but we found that it works wonderfully, and lots of people are using it that way, but the report is lagging behind. But eventually you'll be able to run a single report and pull all that information together. Right now you have to run the reports individually, do some screenshots, copy paste, that type of thing to put together a report that you'll deliver to your end customer. But again, on the roadmap, and you'll see that pop up again tomorrow when I do our roadmap discussion. Again, you know, different people are going to have different opinions on this, but my opinion is if I can get away with just doing the active QoE testing, I can have confidence that the network's going to be okay. And that may be all I'm providing to the end customer, that single report that shows the call quality between all those different agents, all those different routes that I've created, and we're detecting no issues. If you run into something, then I would suggest that you start drilling in and providing more and more data. Other people may be of the opinion that I'm going to go in there and show that customer, demonstrate my capability to that customer, and provide them with every bit of data I can get my hands on so that they understand my total reach into their environment if they further engage with me to take care of their voice systems. So this is just kind of a sample report that I put together. Again, we've got our active QoE assessment calls. I knew that we had some poor ones, so what I did is I ran the more detailed report, looked for those poor call qualities, highlighted the problem there, and just made a quick little statement about what was happening. Then on another route, we were seeing the same type of thing, and you'll recognize that bandwidth graph, right? We were just getting to the point where they were out of bandwidth, and as they did that, that's when we saw those poor and terrible calls. I was able to use the timestamps of the different reporting to point out that anytime you get up to that point, your call quality suffers. And then this is what happens when our wonderful salespeople get a hold of that report. They put a fancy cover on it, and it looks awesome. Did you not know that slide was in there?
Everybody knows his name is Jeffrey, right? Seriously, and you can ask us in the bar later how he got the name Jeffrey.
Nobody's afraid of a Jeffrey.
So were you blurring out the middle section of him on purpose?
He went down to the strip last night with some of y'all.
He does have a cape.
But it's on backwards. It's not superhero.
Questions, comments, sarcastic remarks. Now is the time. Please, Brad.
So when you're configuring the agent to simulate calls, is there a maximum number of calls you can stack up? And can you saturate the network with it if you wanted to?
There is a maximum number. It's 24 for that hardware appliance. So if you need to do considerably more than that, a couple of different things you can do. You could stack multiple appliances, not really optimal. The other thing, though, is that you could use the video testing to take a certain amount of that bandwidth and then put the next level of test calls on top of it. So if I can use the video, which pumps a lot more data in there, to take up 100 of the test calls that I need to make and then do the final 10 to 24 using the voice over IP calls, that's another way to get to that point.
Okay. And then can you schedule up different modalities or different codecs? So once every hour, I want to do a G711. Once every 30 minutes, I want to do a
Yeah.
HD dump or HD video dump.
We don't have that capability currently. The way that I deal with that is by preparing those different configuration templates for my different scenarios. And then as I reach specific date and time points in my testing plan, it takes, 10 seconds to swap that so that I change the behavior of the agent. It is on our feature request list, though, to be able to say, okay, for the first day, for the first 4 hours, I want you to do one call. And I want you to use G711. And then after that, I want you to do, Y number of calls. So it's not anything that will be in the roadmap currently, but we do have that kind of listed. If that's super critical, let me know, because that's the only way things move up in the priority list.
Okay. And for the data that's collected as you execute these synthetic calls, is that data transmitted real time back to the core, or is that configurable so that it will transmit a day's worth of?
It's near real time. We're trying not to store any data and then send it all up in batch. We're trying to get it up as fast as we can. And the main reason is for the monitoring capabilities in VXPulse. If I'm collecting data that I want to alarm on, we want to get it up to where the alarms can take place as soon as possible.
Okay.
Yes?
The passive QoE, what's the limits on compliance?
So again, we're kind of collecting that information. We're really just looking at the UDP headers. We're not trying to dive all the way through the packets. Collecting up those metrics and sending them up to the cloud. So we're not creating any large files on the micros where you could run out of space. We're just capturing as quickly as we can and sending the metrics up.
Now, the micro appliance, which is the inexpensive all-in-one box, is 100 megabit NIC, and we haven't had any problems with that, mostly because the OS and CPU are filtering everything out. We only bring into memory 72 bytes of the UDP packets, because that's all we really need to do it. So you can run the soft agent on bigger iron if you thought that there was bigger pockets where there was going to be problems, and it's pretty efficient. I did want to add into another layer for QoE on the passive side is specifically the Microsoft Link. And that we grab the records from the monitor and archive server role. So if you're familiar with the whole Link setup, there's a role designed where every endpoint reports just an unbelievably rich set of data to Link that then stores in a database. And we pull that out from one spot. So you don't need a PCAP or packet capture, you don't need to synthetically generate. It's all in there, and you could be a mobile worker from home, and we can tell you what kind of network connection you were on, if any virus was an issue, quality. It's incredibly robust. So anyone in here doing Link is exceptionally good right when you do a pilot. Do the pilot, have the agent read all that data in, apply alerts and rules, and demonstrate the analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just restate some of that so that we have it for the videos that I'm sure will be cut up and they'll make me look good later. If you are in the space where you need to collect information about Link performance, the agent can dip into that QoE metrics database, I believe is the name of the database, that just stores all this information about the quality of those actual Link calls. Bring that in a nice reporting framework. We have what I fondly refer to as the Christmas tree view, which is a grid that's going to kind of show you a bunch of metrics and the individual users. And green is good, red is bad, yellow is eh. That's why I call it the Christmas tree view. And then from there you can drill in till eventually you're all the way down to looking at every bit of data that the Link is storing on the quality of those calls. It's a really, really nice tool. And honestly, part of the reason that we talk about Link so much is because we feel like we have really good solutions for Link. And so the more people that are out there doing it, hopefully the more are using our tools. We make more money. I get to go on vacation. Woohoo! There's my email address. There's my phone number. Please feel free to call me directly or work through one of our wonderful, wonderful salespeople who are completely and totally competent. I'm just kidding. As you can probably tell, we have a fairly good time working together. Anything else before we wrap that up? Excuse me? I know that you're all soulless monsters, so I'm not worried about it. Anything else? Thank you very much.